Hi everyone, and welcome to Top Team Testing. In this series, I go over a reasonably successful team and analyze its strengths, weaknesses, and common game plans through the lens of several replays, including a best of 3. After one 10-minute video, you should feel comfortable bringing this team to a local tournament, if we ever get them back. Today, we're featuring the team that Willy VGC used to win the 135-player Zelda Tour this past weekend. The team is built around our old friend Coalossal. Feels like every time this Pokemon slips under the radar just a little bit, that people stop prepping for it and it comes back and wins a big tournament. This team is built very similarly to how past Coalossal teams have worked, where it utilizes Coalossal's massive damage output once its weakness policy is procced, as well as the passive damage output from the Gmax Volcalith to put your opponent's Pokemon in range of the powerful damage traders like Urshifu, Choice Band Rillaboom, Glastrier, and even Dusclops, weirdly enough. Willy told me this team was partially inspired by the Coalossal team that I used to get top 4 in the Hexa Cup this previous weekend, and I recorded every single best of 3 I played in that tournament. There were a lot of incredible games, and you can watch my entire run through the tourney on the Icehouse YouTube channel, which is linked in the description. If they're not uploaded, blame Don Check, and if they are, Don, you are the best. But first, let's see what this good Coalossal team can do. This replay shows how Coalossal wins games when your opponent doesn't respect it in Team Preview. As an aside, our opponent has a Regirock on their team, a Pokemon that gets absolutely bodied by Rapid Strike Urshifu. Our opponent opts not to bring that mode, bringing Dragapult and Rillaboom in the front against our Urshifu and Coalossal. They max the Dragapult and we max the Coalossal, but we go for a Protect from our Urshifu. They fake out into the Protect, and then they max Airstream into the Protect as well, greedily trying to pick up a KO we were never going to let them take. Instead, we KO the Rillaboom with a max Flare, and they choose to bring in their Grimmsnarl. Now, if they have Fake Out, this might get tricky, but instead they let us self Aqua Jet to boost Coal and proc its weakness policy while they set up Light Screen. This does allow Grimmsnarl to survive a Volcalith, but the chip damage has begun. Dragapult gets to take a KO on Urshifu, but it's a turn too late. Urshifu's job has been completed. We bring in the Glastrier, and their Grimmsnarl goes for a Reflect. However, it's putting out no pressure whatsoever, so we get to ignore it and double up the Dragapult with Volcalith and Ice Crash to take an easy knockout after their max Wormwind. At this point, they don't have the damage output to KO both of our Pokemon, and they concede. This game showcases what happens when your opponent does respect Coalossal, usually by committing an early game, relatively weak Dynamax. In this game, they lead Tapu Fini and Kartana into our Urshifu and Coalossal. They switch Kartana to Dragapult immediately and Dynamax the Tapu Fini. However, we protected our Coalossal. They set up Rain for our Urshifu and proc our Coalossal's weakness policy with the Max Geyser, as well as giving us the speed boost. We decide Dynamaxing might not be the play here, and so instead we pick up the KO on Dragapult with an Earth Power and Surging Strikes while they break our Sash with the Shadow Ball. Tapu Fini does get to KO Coalossal, but now we can set up our endgame because we haven't Dynamaxed yet. They bring in Kartana and we bring in Dusclops. Frisk reveals an Assault Vest, and then we Aqua Jet to break a potential Focus Sash because I cannot read. They choose not to KO Urshifu, instead doubling the Dusclops, but it doesn't do enough, so we get up Trick Room. We switch into Glastrier and go for a Pain Split. They Calm Mind, and they go for a Leaf Blade, still not doing enough to Dusclops. We Dynamax our Glastrier, and they switch Kartana out for a Landorus and protect the Tapu Fini. However, doubling the Kartana here was always a safe play because, they were Assault Vest, and so this gives the horse a KO and an attack boost. From here, our opponent concedes. This team isn't completely reliant on Coalossal. Glastrier can fill a similar role, punching big holes into teams, sometimes snowballing, and other times setting up your endgame damage traders to win the game for you. In this game, we run into my player's Cup team that Alex Underhill used to get top 8 in North America and has a team report on this very channel. They choose to lead Weezing and Regigigas into our Incineroar and Dusclops. They, of course, max the Regigigas as we fake out to break a potential Sash on Weezing and stop Taunt. They go for a max Ground and take the KO on Incineroar, but this lets us set up Trick Room, and we do have Will-O-Wisp on Dusclops, so I think we're in a good spot. We max the Horse, and they protect the Weezing and miss the Will-O-Wisp, and Max Quake does chunk the Weezing for a decent amount of damage. They go for Max Strike and do a little under half to our Glastrier. They switch Weezing out and proc each and every one of our abilities, revealing Aguic Berry on Weezing. Interesting. And bring in Tapu Fini. We go for a Nightshade and a Max Quake into Tapu Fini, which just barely misses the KO. They do half of what they did with their last Max Strike, thank you Slow Start, and Regigigas' Dynamax finally ends. They switch Fini into Rotom, and we go for a Pain Split, which I thought would do a lot more. Regigigas has a very high HP stat, and Max Knuckle does about half to Rotom. Regigigas thankfully misses the Giga Impact, which I think would have been a roll on the Glastrier, and this begins the game of chicken. They go for a double protect to stall out the last turn of Trick Room, and we go for a side pain split to give Glastrier a little bit more health and close combat into a protect. Trick Room runs out, so we protect the Glastrier and reset Trick Room as they go for a double up with Thunderbolt and Giga Impact into the protecting Glastrier. Now they protect the Regigigas, and Nightshade goes into Rotom, but Glastrier's attack does not. With 2 special defense boosts, Glastrier does live the overheat, and slow start ends. Rotom goes out for Tapu Fini, and we protect and KO the Tapu Fini with Nightshade, and of course, attack into our protect. Weezing comes back in, and Regigigas goes for a protect as we side pain split and attack into, of course, the protect. That is 5 straight turns, by the way, of attacking into protects. They switch out into Rotom and protect the Weezing as we hurt ourselves with pain split before KOing the Rotom with the close combat. Trick Room expires, and Regigigas comes back in. This time, we don't protect, and they finally take the KO, and they taunt the Dusclops as our pain split fails. No worries, Urshifu comes in, and while Regigigas brings it to Sash with Giga Impact, we KO it back with close combat, and from here, Weezing has no chance against a +2 Spadef Dusclops, and it's only a matter of time before Dusclops wins the game. One of the issues with this team is its lack of versatility. With the exception of Glastrier, all the Pokemon do exactly one thing well, and so when your opponent has solid interactions into your relatively linear game plans, it's really hard to pull it back. This game shows what happens when your opponent has a Moongus and a water type that isn't Tapu Fini, making it very difficult to lead Coalossal. They actually don't lead that, instead going for Tornadus and a Moongus as we lead Rillaboom and Dusclops. Rillaboom doesn't do anything here, so we switch it out into Glastrier, but they get a Taunt and a Spore into Dusclops. But they're still not putting any pressure out, so we maybe can just wake up before they start doing damage. They switch out into Rotom Heat and Spore as we sleep. Then they switch out a Moongus into Tornadus and overheat the Glastrier, getting a crit which KOs it as we get the 3-turn sleep. They switch Rotom back into a Moongus, and at this point we have to Dynamax something. So they taunted the Dusclops, and we just double the Torn to KO it. We knew that we were never getting a Trick Room off here. And they bring in Zapdos and get to Dynamax it. G-Max Rapid Flow does very little to it, but Max Airstream does a lot of damage back, and Spore into Urshifu is the coup de grace. We play it out for another couple turns, but at this point, we really just don't have the damage to KO a Pokemon like Zapdos or a Pokemon like a Moongus since we have Rillaboom in the back, and so we concede. Now let's move on to the best of 3. This tournament was held on Pokemon Showdown, so most of the matches are either public replays or were streamed at twitch.tv/ZeldaVGC if you want to watch more of Willy's run. We'll check out Willy's top 16 match, so you might have figured out who won this one. Our opponent is using a team built around Lapras and Cantonian Moltres. They lead Raichu and Landorus into our Incineroar and Dusclops, and we see that the Landorus is an Assault Vest variant, and the Raichu has a Focus Sash. They fake out, which stops our fake out, and Rock Slide fails to get the flinch, so Dusclops gets up a Trick Room. They switch Landorus out for Moltres, and we Pain Split to break the Focus Sash before Flare Blitzing and not coming close to KOing the Raichu, but we do get a burn. Raichu goes for a Charm to reduce Incineroar's attack stat, and Nightshade picks up the KO on Raichu as Incineroar goes for a Snarl to weaken the Moltres. Moltres' Heat Wave does basically nothing. They bring in the Landorus, and they switch out Moltres into Rillaboom. We Will-O-Wisp the Landorus, and Incineroar completely whiffs on a Snarl as Landorus pivots back into the Moltres with U-turn. Moltres now Dynamaxes, and Rillaboom fakes out the Incineroar to prevent a Snarl. It does eat a Will-O-Wisp for its troubles, and Moltres goes for a Max Flare into Dusclops, setting up Sun right as Trick Room expires. Now getting the chance to move first, Moltres KOs the Dusclops with another Max Flare, and Rillaboom pivots out into Landorus with U-turn, while our Incineroar pivots back into the Horse with Parting Shot. Incineroar comes right back into our free slot, and Glastrier Dynamaxes. We don't go for a fake out, so Landorus does get to U-turn out, and Moltres gets to Max Quake off into the Incineroar, which doesn't quite KO it. We Parting Shot right back out off the Moltres, dropping it to -2 special attack and bringing in the Urshifu. Glastrier takes a KO onto Rillaboom, turning off the Sun, and essentially ending the game as Moltres' Dynamax just completed. Game 2 kicks off, and we lead Incineroar and Dusclops once again, this time into Raichu and Urshifu. Frisk reveals a Choice Band, forcing us to switch out Dusclops into Urshifu as they go for a Fake Out and a Wicked Blow. Their Urshifu comes out for a Landorus, and they Volt Switch, but we protected with our Urshifu so they don't get the switch as our parting shot goes into the Landorus and brings Dusclops in safely. We switch Urshifu back into the Incineroar as they Volt Switch into their Moltres, and they go for a Rock Slide with the Landorus, which does get a flinch on Dusclops, stopping us from getting Trick Room up. Landorus switches out into Raichu, and Moltres Dynamaxes, getting a free Max Quake to KO the Incineroar. This lets us set up Trick Room, however, and gives us a free switch to Glastrier. Raichu switches out into Landorus to get the Intimidate as we Dynamax the Glastrier, picking up the KO with Nightshade and Max Hailstorm into the Landorus. Moltres goes for a Max Flare, turning the Sun back on, and doing just about half damage to Glastrier. Raichu comes back in, and the Horus Max guards. Dusclops breaks the Raichu's Focus Sash with Nightshade, and Moltres attacks into a Protect. Raichu pivots back into Urshifu, and we KO the Urshifu with a Nightshade and Max Quake, and Heatwave in the Sun is not quite enough to KO a special defense boosted Ice Horse. Dynamax ends, and we Protect in front of the Fake Out from Raichu, and we Pain Split the Moltres. Heatwave does do a chunk to Dusclops, but more importantly, it gets the burn right as Trick Room expires. Glastrier goes down to a Volt Switch, and Moltres Air Slashes the Dusclops, and Nightshade chunks the Raichu right as Sun expires. We bring in our Water Urshifu, and has to Protect as Raichu tries to Volt Switch it, and Moltres also tries to Air Slash it. Nightshade just barely fails to pick up the KO on Raichu, but Aqua Jet does the job as Moltres KOs back with Air Slash, and Pain Split makes this a very even 1v1. They go for a Protect as we Trick Room, and Dusclops, with a special defense boost, is an absolute game ender. Slowly, but steadily, Nightshade does enough damage to pick up the set. So let's recap. This team is the newest iteration of the archetype that has been a colossal threat in every series since its Gigantamax form was released. Coalossal and Gmax Volcalyth's damage output clear the way for powerful endgame Pokemon like Rillaboom, Urshifu, Glastrier, and Dusclops to clean up games. This runs parallel to how Series 3 Coalossal teams worked, where they usually had a Dusclops and Conkeldurr in the back to finish off games, while also using a Choice Band Rillaboom like Santi did in Series 5. Unlike past Coalossal teams, it does not have a Surf Dragapult on it. This is usually fine. You can always Protect and KO the redirection or fake out options with Coalossal. None of them really resist its attacks. However, when your opponent has redirection next to something that can KO Coal, you're forced to rely on your secondary mode. In this team, the secondary Dynamax option is Glastrier. This is a near perfect fit next to Coalossal as it punishes most of the counterplay to it. Your opponent has to think twice before setting up Trick Room or Dynamaxing a ground type with Glastrier lurking in the back. Furthermore, this big bundle of stats often requires an opponent's Dynamax to deal with, so if they choose to max something like Tapu Fini that often doesn't have the firepower to beat a Dynamax Glastrier, they are very quickly going to lose the game if you choose not to Dynamax the Coalossal. Even in games where you don't bring Coal, Glastrier often puts enough damage into teams to allow your powerful endgame damage traders to clean up games. While this team is very powerful, the one downside is that it is also quite rigid. You realistically only have two Dynamax Pokemon, being Coalossal and Glastrier. You also don't have the same wealth of options to proc Coalossal's weakness policy that past iterations of the teams did, and so in that sense, the mode is quite linear. The Glastrier mode is also quite powerful, but the team isn't built to enable it as much, having only one Trick Room setter, no weakness policy, and the Pokemon that are around it don't actually benefit from the Trick Room. And so, it's a very strong Pokemon, but if your Glastrier doesn't do enough damage in those turns, you often lack the necessary damage output to win the game. Your opponent knows you only have two modes on this team, and so if they can respond to both of them, such as with the Amoonguss Lapras lead I was so scared of, you often don't have much of a matchup. In practice, this happens very infrequently. Teams aren't built to beat these combinations of Pokemon right now. However, like always, I expect the metagame to respond to Coalossal's re-entrance and make life a lot more difficult for it. That being said, Willy definitely had the meta call for this weekend and piloted it incredibly well all the way through, so congrats once again to him. If you want to try this team out for yourself, you can find a rental code and the importable in the description down below, and while you're scrolling down there, make sure to click that subscribe button. Until next time, I will see you later.